My name is Howard Eber, and I am an alcoholic. I want to welcome everyone to week number 71 of this cycle. It is likely to be the second to last, maybe third to last. As I look at the calendar and I calculate things out, I think we may be wrapping up the cycle next week, which will leave us 2 weeks where we kind of take off a little bit and we have some guest speakers come in and run things. We'll announce those at the time. And we will probably be beginning the new cycle the first Sunday in February. So tentatively, let's now look at Sunday, February 1st, as the first meeting of the new cycle. So spread the word. We'll get officially, we'll announce it next week probably, but we'll get started with a new cycle. All right, we are wrapping things up. We're in a vision for you, and we are kind of ending the cycle the same way we began it, which is with history. Um, this chapter was uh, it's filled with contrasts, but what it is way, way back on page 14. Way back in December of 1934, Bill had a vision. He had a spiritual experience. He fell to his knees. He had a vision. And this is the vision of one alcoholic helping another alcoholic in an endless string of one on ones, face to face, nose to nose, eye to eye. That was Bill Wilson's vision. Not that he would get out of the hospital and make a fortune on Wall Street. That wasn't what he thought. His vision was, when I get out of here, I'm going to go help somebody else. And so he came out and wrote the book, and people started doing what was written in the book, started getting the results that were promised in the book, and fellowship started to be created. But before that could happen, you have a lot of people all over the place who are doing these things, who are getting some kind of spiritual enlightenment, and not sure what to do with it at this point. So they're reaching out to Bill and asking, "Well, what do I do? What do I do?" And Bill answers like he usually does, "I'll tell you what we did." And so what was done here is a fellowship was created by us. It's hard to imagine what it would be like back then, because today, at any time, you can go 5 or 10 minutes in almost any direction, no matter where you are in this world, and you could probably find a meeting. It wasn't so back then. Uh, Today, that fellowship was created by us, one person at a time, talking about talking to their sponsor. That's how the fellowship was created, was through sponsorship. So when we talk about sponsorship being fundamental, it is, because that's how this came about, was one-on-one helping another, on and on and on. And where we are today, I believe we're on page 157. And where we've what we've gone through here is Bill is relaying how he got this started, how he, out of being in a terrible position of fear, um, gave birth to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm looking for my notes here, and I'm not finding it, but that's okay. Um, the fear I'm talking about is he had gone out there on a business venture that had failed, and his partners cut out. They left him with, I think, $10 in his pocket, and Bill was afraid. He felt he was on thin ice because he'd had a spiritual experience a few months before. He felt the presence of God, but things weren't going his way, and he was thinking about drinking. So Bill is feeling a lot of fear. At the same time, There's another person in Akron that's dealing with a lot of fear. A surgeon who had just confessed to his Oxford group fellows that he was a hopeless alcoholic. And he was afraid that what little practice he had left, he was going to lose. So fear was motivating and surrounding both of these people. And so they were faced with a dilemma. They both had dilemmas to face. And I heard a great definition of a dilemma the other day. A dilemma is an unpleasant situation that has two equally unpleasant outcomes. Once again, a dilemma is an unpleasant situation that has two equally unpleasant outcomes. For example, we have a choice to go on to the bitter end, jails, institutions, and death, or choice two, to do this work. To do this work. You think I want to confess my shortcomings to everybody, to people? You think I want to go around and right the wrongs that I've caused? You think I want to do all of that stuff? Well, way back on page 25, Bill mentions that he knows we're not going to want to do all of that. But that's one of the unpleasant choices we have to make if we want to recover, or else we stay with the first unpleasant choice, which is drinking ourselves to death. So we're on page 157. Bill had already um, um, made the phone call. He had a decision whether he would go into the bar and strike up a conversation over a glass of ginger ale, or maybe three drinks, no more than that. At least Bill was realistic about his capacities. He didn't say, I'm just going to start with and have only one. He knew he wouldn't stop at one, but he started at three, and that scared him. That scared him. And on the other side of the hotel lobby was the church directory, and he chose a name out of that directory. And it was pointed out last week, and I've spoken to a number of people, and it makes a lot of sense that it was not necessarily the oddness, if you will. I don't even know if that's a word, oddness, of Walter Tunks's name that Bill picked out among all the other clergymen in Akron. He picked Walter Tunks. And the story has always been told that, well, Bill liked these odd names, and so he picked that. Well, I think someone came up with an idea, a suggestion last week, and like I said, I mentioned it to a few people who are, I would consider historians, and they felt the same way, that what probably happened was more likely to be this. Bill was working in New York with Sam Shoemaker. Sam Shoemaker was the head of the Oxford groups in New York. He headed the Calvary Mission, the Calvary Church. And Bill would come over and they would have these long, long discussions. And Sam Shoemaker knew Bill was going to Akron. So it's almost a given that he would tell Bill, look up this guy. He's the leader of the Oxford groups in Akron. Since you're going to be going over there, look this guy up. And who knows, maybe he told Tunks about Bill. But the fact is that there's probably a little bit more to how he chose that name. Just complete arbitrary choice. That sounds great, but the other one's probably more closer to the truth. In any case, he picked this name. He called Walter Tunks. He said, I'm a rumhound from New York and I need to talk to an alcoholic, or else I'm afraid I'm going to start drinking. And Tunks gave him the name of 10 people. And Bill supposedly called the first nine without success. And the 10th person he got through to was a man by the name of Norman Shepherd. How cool is that? You know what a shepherd does? He keeps the flock together. And so that's what Bill did. He called Shepherd, and Shepherd knew of somebody, a woman in town who was asking around for her friend, a physician who had recently acknowledged that he was an alcoholic, and gave Bill the information to contact Henrietta Seiberling. And he didn't want to do that because the Seiberling family, not particularly Henrietta, but her ex-husband, was part of the group that kind of put the kibosh on Bill's business transaction in Akron. So he didn't really want to call this guy, this woman, but he wanted to stay sober more than anything else. So it came down to how free do you want to be? What extremes are you willing to go to? What lengths are you willing to go to? And he was willing to call this person who he was afraid of because of the recent experience he had with family members. Turns out it wasn't her, it was her ex-husband. Doesn't matter. In any case, called Henrietta. Henrietta said, "You get right over here, young man." And while Bill was on the way over, she called Dr. Smith, Dr. Bob, and found Annie Smith had answered the phone and told Henrietta that, tomorrow's Mother's Day, and the doctor has brought home a beautiful potted plant for me for Mother's Day. And now that potted plant is sitting right here on the kitchen table. And the good doctor is now laying potted underneath the kitchen table. So it's probably not a good day for us to get together. Why don't you come over tomorrow? And Henrietta put Bill up at her country club, and they came over the next day after a lot of hassling back and forth, I'm sure, between Annie and Dr. Bob. And he finally acknowledged, "I will give you 15 minutes. I don't want to talk to this mug from New York, but I'll give you 15 minutes. And after 15 minutes, you knock on that door and we get at it. We're going to get out of there." So when the doctor showed up, they sat down to have a meal. And as it turns out, Bill is sitting watching Dr. Bob, and Dr. Bob is shaking. He can't even get the food into his mouth. So Bill said, "You look like you could use a drink, my friend. Why don't you come in the other room? Let's talk a bit." And Bill told him his story. Bill got Dr. Bob's attention by telling him his story. He didn't start trying to drag information out of Bob. He told him what he knew about the problem of alcoholism and then the solution that he's found. And when 15 minutes came around, he told his wife, "Go away. I'm going to stay here." And 6 hours later, walked out with Bill and told his wife, "This guy, the first guy I ever met, first person I ever met who knew what he was talking about alcoholism, and he's going to come over and stay with us for a while." And that's kind of like where we're finding things here. We're on page 157. I keep saying that. We didn't get there yet. Uh, and Bill had gone to stay with Dr. Bob, and they realized that in order to stay sober, they needed to work with other alcoholics. So they called the Akron City Hospital to see if there was anybody that they might get to work with. And Nurse Hall, I believe was her name, Hall, the admissions nurse, said, "Yeah, we got a real corker here. He's giving black eyes to other nurses. We got him strapped down in bed." And Dr. Bob said, "Great, put him in a private room. We'll be down shortly." And they didn't have private rooms, so they just cleared out a supply room and wheeled a bed in there. And she also said to Dr. Bob, "By the way, have you tried?" Because Dr. Bob said, "We got a guy here from New York who has a recovery method for alcoholism." And the nurse later said to Dr. Bob, "By the way, have you tried this on yourself?" Again, Dr. Bob thinking nobody knows what the problem is. And of course, as we all know, everybody knows the problem. So, um, they set out to work with others. The nurse put this guy over in a private room. The guy's name was Bill Dotson. Turned out to be AA number 3. His story was and still is in the big book. His name, he's been referred to as the man in the bed because of that famous painting of a guy in the bed with the two figures sitting next to him, supposedly Bill and Bob, and the guy in the bed supposedly is Bill Dotson. And without spending too much time dissecting the picture, it's not necessarily as clear as that. It's not a hospital room. It's not a hospital bed. There's a bottle of alcohol on the dresser. He's in street clothes. There's a whole lot of inconsistencies in the picture, but we call it the man in the bed because it fits the story so nicely. And the man in the bed um, had told about his history with alcohol. And if we take a look at page 157, middle of page, hopelessness. Finally get around to reading the book. I knew we would. Hopelessness was written large on the man's face as he replied, "Oh, that's no use." Should have started with the sentence before where he said, "We're giving you a treatment for alcoholism." Now, notice you didn't say a cure. We have a treatment. And he said, "Oh, that's no use. Nothing will fix me. I'm a goner. The last 3 times I got drunk on the way home from here." Can anybody identify with that? It was one time I didn't make it out of the parking lot. I was high before I left the parking lot at the rehab that I just spent 30 days in. I hadn't even turned the car over and I was wasted. I'm afraid to go out the door. I can't understand it. He's experiencing that same incomprehensible demoralization that Bill experienced way back on page 30. Bill felt it. We all felt it. So does he. So for an hour, the two friends told him about their drinking experiences. Please highlight that. The friends told him about their drinking experiences. They got his attention by telling him about themselves. The same way Bill got Dr. Bob's attention by telling him his story. Now Bill and Bob are getting Bill Dotson's attention by telling them individually their story. Continuing over and over, he would say, "That's me. That's me. I drink like that." That is identification. So he's getting Dotson to identify by telling him their story, and they're getting his attention, and it's the right kind of attention. He's identifying, he's seeing himself in these two guys who are sitting there telling their story. The man in the bed was told of the acute poisoning from which he suffered, how it deteriorates the body of an alcoholic and warps his mind. There was much talk about the mental state preceding the first drink. That last part of the paragraph should be underlined, the mental state preceding the first drink. They're talking about the insanity of the mental obsession. They're describing basically step one. What is the problem? "Yes, that's me," said the sick man, the very image. You may want to highlight, "Yes, that's me." And next to it, I've written step one being taken, because that's all it is. Bill Dotson takes step one. He recognizes, yep, that's the problem, and I've got it. The very image. "You fellas know your stuff all right, but I don't see what good it'll do. You fellas are somebody. I was once, but I'm nobody now. From what you tell me, I know more than ever I can't stop." Let's highlight that. I know more than ever I can't stop. Because it started out, we read a little while ago, hopelessness was written on his face. Well, he's now describing it. He's telling him how hopeless he is. He knows he can't stop. And it's ironic. He says, "You guys are somebody." Now let's deal with who is he sitting talking to. He's talking to a failed stock trader who's broke, and he's dealing with a proctologist, a surgeon, a colorectal surgeon who's losing his business because of his alcoholism. So these guys are both tapped out. They're not anybody. And Bill Dotson is thinking that they are somebody compared to him. Now, Bill Dotson was an attorney. Bill Dotson ran for city council several times and lost every time, but he had a certain amount of stature. He was an attorney. He hadn't lost his license. He had run for office and he was going to run again. But the point is, he felt so lousy about himself that these two guys who had pretty much bottomed out, had nothing, he views himself as them having so much more than him that he could never get it. Well, let's continue. He said, "At this, both the visitors burst into a laugh. said the future anonymous, damn little to laugh about that I could see. The two friends, please highlight this, spoke of their spiritual experience. They're presenting the solution. But again, their experience. They're not telling Dotson what he should do, must do, will do. They're saying what they have done. They're showing what they've done. Spoke of their spiritual experience and told him about, let's highlight the course of action they carried out. The course of action, of course, are the steps. And I'm going to suggest you underline those last few words, they carried out, because once again, experience, experience, experience. That's how they relate. That's how we get people's attention, is through relating our experience. Uh, he interrupted. I used to be strong for the church, but that won't fix it. I prayed to God on hangover mornings and sworn I'd never touch another drop, but by 9 o'clock, I'd be boiled as an owl. Now, let's just stop for a second because that expression, I've been asking people for years if they know a little bit of the history of where that term boiled as an owl came from. And I've got a lot of different explanations, none of which properly explain it as far as I'm concerned. But I'll pass along to you some of the things that I've been told. Um, there's a great program on public radio called Away with Words. And the host of it, Grant Barrett, was nice enough to communicate with me about this. And he said that the boiled owl reference goes back to a slang term for being drunk, which is boiled. They used to call people who were drunk boiled, and or they used to call them owl-eyed because they're all droopy-eyed. So they just put these two things together and put boiled as an owl. It makes sense. I don't know if that's definitely the way that it came about, but, and it's also been said that an owl's gaze, you know, the way an owl just stares at you, is like a drunk's glossy look when we're wasted and all we're doing is spacing out like an owl. So if anybody comes up with anything more than that, please let me know. But at this point, that's as close as I've been able to come to an answer for what the heck is and where did boiled as an owl come from. Back to the story. Next day, found the prospect more receptive. He'd been thinking it over. Maybe you're right, he said. God ought to be able to do anything. Let's highlight that. God ought to be able to do anything. Then he added, he sure didn't do much for me when I was trying to fight this booze racket alone. Incidentally, that's Bill Dotson taking step two. In case we missed it, that's Bill taking step two. On the third day, let's underline third day, please. The lawyer, Bill Dotson, and let's highlight, gave his life to the care and direction of his creator. Took step three. And there's, a story within a story here about sponsoring people. Please note that Bill and Bob kept coming back day after day. They first showed up and got his attention. The next day, he was a little bit more receptive, and he said, God ought to be able to do anything. And then on the third day, so they've been there 3 days in a row, he gave his life to the care and direction of his creator and said he was perfectly willing to do anything necessary. He took the third step on the third day, not after 90 days, not after 6 months, not after a year. Third step, third day. And that might even be considered a long time because Bill didn't take Bill 3 days to get to the third step. But in any case, and he said he was perfectly willing to do anything necessary. His wife came, scarcely daring to be hopeful, though. She thought she saw something different about her husband already. And let's highlight, he had begun to have a spiritual experience. And above spiritual experience, let's put down the word that best describes it, change. That he's begun to change. Kind of like, remember when Ebby showed up at Bill's door and Bill said there was something about his eyes, right? He was different. Well, the wife is seeing the same thing in Bill Dodson. There's something about him that's changed. This is not the same person that I brought into the hospital 2 days ago. Continuing, he had begun to have a spiritual experience. That afternoon, he put on his clothes and walked from the hospital a free man. He entered a political campaign, making speeches, frequenting men's gathering places of all sorts, often staying up all night. He was spiritually fit, so he was able to go to places where you would think somebody who would had his background would not go to. But remember, we've been told that there's no place on earth we can't go if we're recovered. And recovered means we are spiritually fit and we have an adequate reason for being there. He was running for office, so he went to these gathering places where probably alcohol was served, but he wasn't affected by that because he was spiritually fit and his motive was right. He was running for office. Unfortunately, and he was doing that incidentally as a result of his plan of action. He worked the steps, had a spiritual experience, had a spiritual awakening. And as a result of that, one of the results was that he was able to enter this political campaign and it didn't threaten his sobriety. He lost the race by only a narrow margin. And please highlight in pink this last sentence. But he found God, and in finding God, he found himself. Um, what I think uh, he's talking about here is this is a guy who um, had a notion, had a concept of himself, of what his job in life was supposed to be. What does God want me to be? Well, I'm a lawyer, so I want to help people and I run for political office. And that was how Bill Dotson defined himself up until this point. He defined himself as a public servant in terms of politics. But he lost this election, and rather than feeling dejected, he felt enervated because now he understood what God had in mind for him. God wants him to serve, but not in a political arena, in the recovering community. And so he found his place in life. He found his identity. His identity was not to be to be holding a political office. His identity was to help other alcoholics. He found God, and in finding God, he found himself. In other words, he was freed from these failed ideas, from these failed attitudes which used to define him. And he now knows, at least has a better idea of what God wants him to do in this life. That was June 1935. He never drank again. I'm going to suggest you highlight both of those sentences. June, incidentally, the date is June 26, 1935. That was the date of Bill Dotson's sobriety. And I'm going to suggest you underline never drank again in red, because one of the things we've been trying to do through the workshop is every time we get a reference to permanent sobriety is indicated, noted with red. And this is a reference to permanent sobriety. If he never drank again, he achieved permanent sobriety. Just like people who say we don't use the word recovered, the book uses it. As long as we're using it properly, there's nothing wrong with it. And that's the same as permanent recovery. He had achieved permanent recovery. When he died sober, and he never had that drink again. He had achieved permanent sobriety. He too has become a respected and useful member of his community. You may want to underline useful, because what he thought useful was is not what he now feels useful is. He thought useful was serving in a political campaign, to serve and hold political office. He now believes being useful is helping another drunk. He has helped other men recover. Let's underline that and highlight the word recover in orange, because that's how we denote recover and recovered and recovering references. And has a power in the church from which he was long absent. So you see, there were three alcoholics in that town who now felt, and please highlight the rest of this, they had to give to others what they had found or be sunk. Had to is also circled in green, because had to is another way of saying must. They felt they must give to others what they had found or be drunk. I know the word says sunk, but it means both things. If they don't help others, they're going to wind up drinking again. They wind up drinking again, they're sunk. So sunk drunk means the same thing. After several failures to find others, a fourth turned up. He came through an acquaintance who had heard the good news. He proved to be, please underline this, the way they describe this guy, a devil-may-care young fellow. And let's take a look at who this dude is. Andy, if you'll give me, I think, let's start with number 17. I think there are two pictures numbered 17. Either will do. This gentleman is the person we're talking about. His name is Ernie Galbraith, Galbraith. Ernie Galbraith was 30 years old at the time. The young lady standing next to him is Sue Smith, Dr. Bob's daughter. He eventually married her. Dr. Bob wasn't that happy about it. Initially, he was in favor of it, but apparently Ernie had a few relapses. And in Bob's words, he described Ernie as being, quote, a uniquely unlikable fellow. How's that? Is that a polite way to say he's an asshole? A uniquely unlikable fellow. Well, that's who Ernie was. That's who we're talking about. Andy, there's another picture after this of the two of them. If you want to get to that, there we go. That's same two, Ernie G, AA number 4, Akron, and there's Sue. And if anyone's interested in the emails that I sent out, there is the next one, which is the bio of Ernie G. No, go the other way. I think it's number 18, Andy. I didn't leave it out, did I? Number 18.
Would it be a different number?
No, don't worry about it.
Oh, yeah, I've got it.
You got it. It's just a printed sheet. It's a bio. Just bio data, facts about Ernie G. There we go. That should be in your emails. If anyone didn't get the emails, just drop me a line and I'll make sure you got it. But this is the story of Ernie G. That's who we're talking about. This is that devil may care character. So let's get back to the book. So he proved to be a devil may care character. Um, devil may care character. What is that? Anyone ever wonder what that expression means? Well, that's perfect for me. That's chum for me, because a devil may care character is a person with a carefree or lax attitude. A carefree or lax attitude towards a task or towards life in general? As found that in the book on English grammar and the history of these words. But that's what devil may care character is referring to. A person who seems relaxed and not worried about the consequences of their actions. Whatever happens, happens.
What is it, a carefree or
Lacks attitude towards a task or life in general. Lax is just lazy. A lazy attitude towards a task they're supposed to do, or life in general. Again, a person who just seems relaxed and not very worried about the consequences of their actions. Just, it is what it is. That's the devil may care character. So he proved to be a devil may care fellow. And again, that fellow is Ernie Galbraith, Galbrai. Galbraith, whose parents could not make out whether he wanted to stop drinking or not. They were deeply religious people, much shocked by their son's refusal to have anything to do with the church. He suffered horribly from his sprees, but it seemed as if nothing could be done for him. He consented, however, to go to rehab. Again, they didn't have rehabs. They sent him to the hospital. Who knows what diagnosis they admitted him under, because alcoholism was not considered a malady. But he consented. He went to the hospital where he occupied the very room vacated by the lawyer. So they put him in the supply closet that Bill Dotson was in, where he occupied the very room recently vacated by the lawyer. He had 3 visitors. Does it take much to figure out the 3 people we're talking about is Bill Wilson, Bill Dotson, and Dr. Bob, because that's all there was at the time. That's all there was of Alcoholics Anonymous. So he had 3 visitors. After a bit, he said, "The way you fellows put this spiritual stuff makes sense." Please underline spiritual. He doesn't say religious. He sees it for what it is. It's spiritual. I'm ready to do business. I guess the old folks were right after all. So one more was added to the fellowship. This next paragraph, I'm going to suggest, it'd probably be easier to highlight the whole paragraph rather than trying to nitpick our way through it. All this time, our friend of the hotel lobby incident, and that's Bill. The hotel lobby incident is from the Mayflower Hotel. Remained in that town. He stayed with Dr. Bob a few months. He was there 3 months. Let's underline that. 3 months he stayed with Dr. Bob. He now returned home, leaving behind his first acquaintance, Dr. Bob, the lawyer, Bill Dotson, and the devil may care chap, Ernie G. These men had found something brand new in life. And please underline this next 2 sentences. Let me set this up a little bit while you're underlining it. We've spent the past 158 pages being told that working with others is the most important thing we could do. That if we don't do that, we are going to drink again. If we don't develop spiritually, we will drink again. So we're being told here, though they knew they must help other alcoholics, and must certainly is circled in green, help other alcoholics if they would remain sober, that motive became secondary. Now, what's that about? I've spent 158 pages being told the most important thing is working with others, working with others, working with others, working with others is the most important thing. But I'm being told that out of fear is a motivator, that relapse is breathing down my back, that if I don't do this, I'm going to relapse. So what's the motivating thing here is fear. And I've done quite a bit of work in my inventory on fear so that fear doesn't rule, control, and dominate my life as it once did. So he's saying here that helping others out of fear is the wrong motive for helping others. If that's the only motive. And please underline this sentence. It was transcended by the happiness they found in giving themselves for others. So the need to help others was replaced by the sincere desire to be of maximum help to others. Once again, the need, and need is out of fear, was replaced by the sincere desire to be of maximum help to others. Helping others out of the sincere desire to do so is a much higher calling than doing so out of fear. So simply stated, need is replaced by desire. Rather than helping others, because if I don't, I'm going to drink and drug again, was replaced with helping others because I sincerely enjoy and want to help others. That's the motivating factor, not fear. A sincere desire to be of service. It's an extraordinary statement. It took him 159 pages to get to this, but he finally laid it out for us that that's what our goal is. Helping others out of fear is great because we have to help others, but we have to shoot a little bit higher. We have to strive for a goal of wanting to be of service. A desire is replacing a fear, a need. They shared their homes, their slender resources, and gladly devoted their spare hours to fellow sufferers. They were willing by day or night to place a new man in a hospital. And please underline these next three words and let's highlight them in blue and visit them. We use blue as a highlight to denote approach. Somehow in today's culture, it became acceptable to take the attitude of being available for the newcomer. Well, nowhere in this book does it say to do that. It tells us our job is to approach the person who's new, the person who's struggling, the person who's having difficulty, the person who just walked in that door, the person who comes in late and wants to get out early. It's our job to get to that guy, to approach him. So to approach him, and so to put him in the hospital and visit him. And you got to ask yourself, how often do I do that? I am guilty as charged. I've helped a lot more people get into treatment, get into detox, than not go visit them afterwards until they got out, maybe. Back in those days, when you sponsored somebody and put them in the hospital, you were taking responsibility for that person, even to the extent of being responsible financially. That's what sponsorship started as being responsible for that person. So you brought him to the hospital, you visited him, you helped him through the plan of action, and then you introduced him to the Oxford group when he got out. The Oxford group at that time, that group was referred to as the drunk squad of the Oxford group because they weren't interested in changing the world the way the rest of the group was. They were interested in helping the drunks of the world, one at a time. They grew in numbers. They experienced a few distressing failures, but in those cases, they made an effort to bring the man's family into a spiritual way of life through open meetings. Today, Al Anon and open meetings. But back then, the Oxford group had set aside a day, and we'll come across that in a moment, where anyone and everyone who wanted to attend was welcome to do so. So, but in those cases, they made an effort to bring the man's family into a spiritual way of life, of living, thus relieving much worry and suffering. A year and 6 months later, the three had succeeded with 7 more. A year and 6 months. That's after Bill had returned to New York. He was in Akron for 3 months. He went back to New York, and a year and 6 months later, they had 7 more. Now, again, those of you who know me know that history is kind of a passion of mine, and a statement like that is going to send me off on a mission, and I did. I wanted to know, who are they talking about? Who are those 7 people that they're referring to? And I contacted, among the people I contacted was World Services, and they kind of said, look, uh, the truth of the matter is that we don't know exactly which people he was talking about, individuals he was talking about. See, when I sent them the request for that information, I sent them what I thought was a list of members at the time. And their answer to me, and I'll go over those names in a minute, their answer was, we don't know. Your list makes as much sense to us as any other list. And they sent me a list of AA pioneers, of 100 pioneers that could be, that probably included these people, certainly included these people, but it also talks about the first 100. It was in your in the emails. I believe that was, Andy, you've got that somewhere. AA pioneers. Let's see, where is that? Pioneers of AA, number 23. Now, what I did, this is the list that they sent to me. And what I did is I put the numbers next to the, well, 10 that I thought Bill's referring to here. Remember, he said the 3 were joined by 7 more. So there were a total of 10 after that first year and a half. And obviously, number 1 is Bill Wilson. Number 2 is Dr. Bob. Number 3 is Bill Dotson. We know that. Number 4, although he didn't maintain long-term sobriety, was Ernie Galbraith. We know that. As soon as Bill came home to New York from Akron, he went right to work at Towns Hospital, and the first person he had success with was Hank Parkhurst. So he would be number 5. His story was called The Unbeliever. He also wrote the outline for Two Employers. He was Bill's partner in the writing of this book, but he's number 5. We also know that right after working with Hank, his next success was with Fitz Mayo. John Henry Fitzhugh Mayo was number 6. His story is Our Southern Friend. And then number 7, I have is Walter Bray, whose story was The Backslider. 8 was Joe Doppler, the European drinker. 9, Myron Williams. Hindsight was his story. And the 10th was Paul Stanley, whose story was Truth Freed Me. Andy, I think we have here's now I found my email from World Services. It says, your question has bugged members studying our history for years. The answer is, we don't know just who Bill was referring to. The list of possibilities is much longer than you may think, as you can see. If you want to split hairs, there weren't, quote, more than 100 men and women, close quote, when the book was published either. Well, be that as it may, they knew what they were dealing with Bill. Let's take a look at some of the biographical information on these people. Andy, you got number 20, I think is the first one I got. Some of these guys' names aren't as recognizable as Bill Dodson, as Fitzmayo. We got number 20 has number 5, Walter Bray, whose story is The Backslider. His suicide attempt got him into the hospital where he met the Prince of the 12 Steppers, Dr. Bob. And he said, all my life I've been doing things of my own human will as opposed to God's will. And the only certain way for me to stop drinking was to submit my will to God and let Him handle my difficulties. He was the first person admitted by Dr. Bob and Sister Ignatia in St. Thomas Hospital, not Akron City Hospital. And then we have number 7, guy by the name of Phil Smith. Took him several weeks to sober up once he connected. Soon after being sequestered to a drying out place, he was sent there by Dr. Bob to avoid jail time. So he was the first court case referral, court mandated. Next one we got is number 21. And it's basically just the pictures of Paul Stanley and Tom Lucas. Anyone interested, you could do your research on these guys. I didn't come up with that much, but at least we'd have pictures. We know what they look like. And Andy, is that yeah, there we go. And then we have number 22, the last two. Nope, the next one. There we go. Joe Doppler, whose story was the European drinker, and Bob Oviatt, whose story was the salesman. This was coming, these guys were from the start of the Cleveland group who drove down to from Cleveland to Akron each week. They were referred to as the Clevelanders. Yeah, we can pass that. I don't want to spend too much time on that stuff. We're running a little close to time anyway. In any case, there's another story. Andy, I don't know if I sent you this one, but I send you the Edgar Riley story. The book tells us, if I go back a page or so, on page 156, it says, but life was not easy for the two friends. You see that paragraph? At the end of the paragraph, it says that the nurse had a first-class alcoholic prospect. That was Bill Dodson. However, there's a guy by the name of Edgar Riley who maintains that he was AA number 3, that he was in the room at the same time that Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson worked with Bill Dodson. And if that's the case, then Dodson would be number 4 and Riley would be number 3. Eddie Riley gained some notoriety because in Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers and Comes of Age, is it Comes of Age or I forget the name of the title. I'll think of it in a minute. Was identified as being a guy who chased Annie around the house with a butcher's knife. He was staying at Dr. Bob's home, and he obviously relapsed, and he was chasing her around the house with a butcher's knife. That's Edgar Riley's claim to fame. But again, he says that he was in the room with Bill Dodson, so that would mean he would be number 3. But I guess because he didn't maintain any sobriety, he wasn't considered in, but that's just another name, Edgar Riley. All right, let's try and continue. We're on page 159 at the bottom. A year and 6 months later, that's after Bill returned to New York, these 3 had succeeded with 7 more. Now we have the 10 that I just named. seeing much of each other, scarce an evening passed that someone's home did not shelter a little gathering of men and women happy in their release and constantly thinking how they might present their discovery to some newcomer. Let's go back through that. I'm going to suggest you highlight scarce an evening passed that someone's home did not shelter a little gathering of men and women. That's describing a meeting. Happy in their release. Let's underline that. They've had a spiritual awakening. They're happy in their release. And constantly, it's underlined constantly, thinking how they might present their discovery to some newcomer. Once again, why do we meet? We meet for the newcomer. We've been told that repeatedly, going back to Bill's story. We meet in these meetings so that the newcomer may find the fellowship that they seek. This is not a place to go and dump your nonsense in the middle of the room, stink up the place, and then leave. This is a place to go to find new people. And in the early days, what we're describing here is those people getting together to figure out how do we get more people in here. So it's not just getting the new guy who walks in the front door, which is what we do today, or hopefully should do. Their thought was, how do we get more people coming in that door? Spread this message, constantly thinking how they might present what they found, their discovery, the solution, to some newcomer. Once again, newcomer. The reason for meetings is newcomers. In addition to these casual get-togethers, it became customary to set apart one night a week for a meeting to be attended by anyone or everyone. And that's what I was making reference to a few minutes ago. These open meetings, interested in a spiritual way of life. And let's highlight this last sentence, last three lines, why we attend meetings, why we have meetings. Aside from fellowship and sociability, the prime object was, and you may want to underline this, provide a time and a place where new people might bring their problems. So once again, the purpose of meetings is for the newcomer. And if you want to take a minute, there's other references. I always like to connect the dots in this book. But after this paragraph, again, why we have meetings, also see page 15. In fact, I'm going to make a suggestion. On page 160, where we just read, might bring their problems. Please make this note. See page 15, comma, 89, 2, and 159, 3. Those are the other 3 points of references. Now, we're going to connect those dots now, or at least you'll have them all noted there. So the first mention I said I gave you is page 15. So if we go to page 15, the last line on page 15, we meet frequently so that newcomers may find the fellowship they seek, may find the spirit of the fellowship they seek. That's first reference. Number 2, let's go to 89, page 89, second paragraph. Last sentence. Frequent contact with newcomers and with each other is the bright spot of our lives. Why we go to meetings. Frequent contact with newcomers. And page 159, paragraph 3, we just read it. The little gathering of men and women happy in their release and constantly thinking how they might present their discovery to some newcomer. All 3, and now 4, with the reference on page 160 as to why we go to meetings for newcomers. Nowhere does it say we go there as a dumping ground for our problems. It's not the point of meetings. The purpose of meetings is to provide a place for newcomers to find the spirit of the fellowship that they seek. And that spirit of the fellowship is created by those of us who are living in and part of the solution. And maybe we can wrap up today with that. Andy, if you want to give me 22A, our solution diagram. There we go. The newcomer walks in the door and he's surrounded by those of us who have found the solution. We tell them of the solution we found. We are responsible for creating a certain atmosphere in the rooms, a certain spirit in the rooms, that camaraderie, that welcomeness, that feeling of incredible belonging. We create that as a member of the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And we surround that newcomer and we give him our experience, strength, and hope. And hopefully, when they're surrounded by that spirit, they begin to believe and then decide that they can do it too. And so they make use of this simple kit of spiritual tools we lay at their feet called the 12 steps. And they work those 12 steps. And what happens? They undergo a personality change sufficient to recover from a hopeless state of mind and body. In other words, they have a spiritual awakening. And then they are now part of the fellowship of the Spirit. And it is now their job to create the spirit within the fellowship that keeps people coming back again and again and again. We have entered the world of the Spirit. So there are two fellowships in a sense. Unfortunately, there's a fellowship of the fellowship and the fellowship of the Spirit. And that shouldn't be the case. The spirit of the fellowship is created by those of us who are part of the solution, living in the solution, creating a certain atmosphere, a certain attraction for the newcomer, and gets that newcomer to go through the steps, have a change in personality, become part of the spirit, the fellowship of the Spirit. And I think we're going to stop right there. Yeah, I'm going to stop there. I'll give us a few minutes if we want to have any discussion or questions.